I mean, I went into the Forward Party knowing that, or I won't say knowing because, life can always surprise you, but I went in thinking, hey, you know what? It's not unlikely that building this party will take 10 to 15 years,
Yeah.
just to get to a point where it's like a very well-oiled machine and we're actually able to do the things that we want, right? But you got to start somewhere and you have to start now, right? Because otherwise you're just delaying, the inevitable. So.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast. This month's volunteer spotlight features Cesar Garcia. Cesar currently serves on the communications committee and has played a major role in implementing the design of the Texas Forward Party website. And we are so grateful to have him. If you haven't checked out the website, be sure and do so at texasforwardparty.org. Prior to joining the comms committee, Cesar worked to establish local nonprofit partnerships in Austin and was the top performer in our first street team event. Brian spoke with Cesar about community building and how the Forward Party makes building from the bottom up a reality, how growing up as the son of first-generation Venezuelan immigrants shaped his political views. And Cesar also makes the case for applying the innovation of the private sector and the startup mentality to our government. We hope you enjoy, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.
All right. Cesar Garcia, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
Pleasure. And I want to apologize to everybody at home for my very boring background. I'm in the middle of a move, so it's a little bit sparse back here, a little bit boring, but we've got a very exciting guest on the episode today to make up for it. So this is actually going to be a volunteer spotlight segment. So Cesar, you've been volunteering for Forward Party early and often in a number of different ways. You and I have gotten acquainted probably about a year ago now. We did the
Yeah,
street
I
team
think
together.
I think it was about a year ago. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, time
Time
flies,
flies.
doesn't it? Yeah, I was talking to well, where did we first meet? Did we meet at Rick's? I think that was it.
We it was either Rick's or the street team. I
Yeah.
I think it was Rick's and then the street team happened. So I think it was at Rick's, yeah.
Yeah, I say that I did a podcast the other day with Dylan. So the
Oh,
old
nice.
getting the gang back together the last couple of weeks here.
Very cool.
Yeah. So Cesar, like I said, you've been involved with our volunteering organization early and often. You started out, you've done some work with the street teams. You've led the way here in Austin with some community building initiatives. You've been connecting the Forward Party with several different volunteer organizations around town, doing some great community outreach. You've been involved with the organization and oversight committee, and now a part of the communications committee with myself and several others. So you and I get to chat every Wednesday at noon. So thanks for
Hmm.
spending a little overtime with me today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to.
Yeah. So the I want to start with some of the efforts that you've made here in Austin and connecting with, the local communities. So tell us a little bit about what you've done there as far as outreach to different organizations, nonprofits around Austin, and just kind of what your vision is for how the Forward Party here in Austin and throughout Texas can really build communities in this way.
Totally, totally. So, I've always believed that for the Forward Party to succeed, we have to show the communities that we're in that we're serious, not only politically, but also about non-political issues, right? Things that are more at the community level. And so last year, and it was probably around July or August, I organized the first volunteer event here in Austin, to my knowledge at least. And it was a cleanup of the area around Lady Bird Lake. And so my thought was, we want to get a group of people together who are Forward supporters. First of all, we want everybody to get to know each other, right? We want people to develop friendships, to start seeing each other outside of work, just getting acquainted with each other, building a lot of bonds of solidarity, right? And then from there, cooperating on particularly visible projects, just to show the city that, hey, we care about things that are not being handled, perhaps by like certain political parties.
Sure.
Um, and we're putting our time, on the weekends after work, towards improving the city, right? And I think it's very important for a new political party to prove itself, right? To demonstrate to the people of the city that we're very serious about, basically working hard to improve everyone's quality of life, right? That we're
Yeah.
responding to issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so good for the brand, right? It's for those people who, and there's a lot of them, there's a lot of them at this point in
Totally.
time. We don't know who the Forward Party is or what we're all about. For that to be that first introduction, these are the folks who are, cleaning up Lady Bird Lake. That's a great way to really present what we're doing in a positive light.
Totally. And, it's everybody wins, right? Forward Party gets great recognition. The city looks more beautiful. We're taking care of the environment. And, the people who are involved are making new friendships, right? And that's the thing that I think is really important for us to remember, is that, we want to make, politics or politics adjacent activities fun, right? They should be, people should be getting to know each other. Ideally, maybe relationships can form, right? Or new friendships, or other things, right? Like you're meeting with like-minded people who are public spirited, care about the future of the country. And, uh, it's always great to get all that fresh blood into, political activities.
Yeah, 100%. I read this stat the other day, and I'm sure a lot of the folks listening at home might have heard this. It was a Wall Street Journal study that said in the last 25 years, they showed like 4 or 5 different values that Americans traditionally have had. It was patriotism, religion, community involvement, having children. I believe there may have been 1 or 2 others, but
Yeah.
all of these had declined by like almost 20%, every single one. The community involvement, and this is percentage of Americans who viewed these values as important or very important over the last 25 years. Community involvement being ranked as important or very important has dropped from 47 to 27% in America. And I mean, you see that in just the way that people are so, it just seems like we're a very isolated country. And that really, I think you see the negative side effects and everything from the mental health crisis to,
Totally.
all sorts of different things really bearing the brunt of that. So,
And a lot of people are isolated physically, but I wonder if they're finding replacements virtually, right? Because I know a lot of people end up, forming these virtual communities that they really engage with. But, as nice as it is to be able to communicate with people, across vast distances with technology, there's really no replacement for in-person, meetings, in my
Definitely.
opinion, at least.
No, and I was having this conversation with someone the other day. It's definitely not all bad with things like social media, or
Mhm.
social media specifically, we'll say, or just even the internet. But there's really a lot of negative consequences that we've had as a result of that. And you can't overlook the fact that if you have a niche interest, you really can connect with so many like-minded people throughout the
100%,
world that
yeah.
you would have never had the opportunity to meet before. But at the same time, it's a deep, deep human need to get out there and see someone face to face and, build those community bonds. So I love that. I love the idea of what you're, pushing in terms of that community engagement, and would love to see other folks throughout the Forward Party in Texas and other cities kind of take the baton and try to do similar things.
Exactly. And the best part about this is that, it's totally decentralized, right? So it's just all of these different in the ideal scenario, it's like, all these different people from around Texas, around the country who, are just calling people up, taking leadership. And you learn a lot when you start organizing events and organizing people to achieve, certain goals. And all of those skills are incredibly important and applicable in all aspects of life, right? And particularly if we want to build a political party, it's going to be very important for us to nurture those skills and talents and the people that have joined.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so cool too. You meet people that you would have never met otherwise from different, um, walks of life, from different industries, and those connections. Who knows what they'll end up, turning into 5 years down the road. You could meet someone in Forward who ends up being a future business partner, and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of different things.
Historically, I think a lot of Americans probably would have met people outside of their like social circles at church, right, or at public
Yeah,
school. But as people have kind of withdrawn from those institutions, uh, we're seeing this scenario where a lot of people just end up kind of in their own bubbles and never really cross paths with anyone who's different from them. And it's unfortunate because if you don't have familiarity with people who are different from you, then your communication with them is going to suffer, and there's just a general sense of distrust, right? That pervades any sort of interaction, and that's really what we want to fight against. We want to recreate the bonds of society, right, at a very public level.
yeah, so important. So, I want to ask you a little bit about your background. So, you are the son of first generation Venezuelan immigrants, and actually, one of my best friends, his wife is from Venezuela.
Oh
So,
wow, yeah.
I had kind of followed Venezuela in the news. Every time I would see the country pop up in an article, just relatively closely. But that country is in just shambles economically, and it was not always this way. So I mean, they you know are the world's largest have the world's largest oil reserve, or once the most prosperous, if not one of the most prosperous countries in South America, and then have just really had a fall
Totally.
from grace. So curious with and when did your parents come to the States, by the way?
Yeah, so my parents came to the States in 1991, particularly because they were doing postgraduate studies. So my mom has lived in the U.S. for over half her life. Like her father, my grandfather was a professor, a college professor in Venezuela. So my mom lived in the U.S. when she was younger, and so she's always had a very strong like American streak culturally in
Got it.
her personality and her beliefs. But because she already spoke English, she recommended to my dad that they do pursue further education in the United States so that my dad's English could improve. And then originally, well, I like to say that I think my mom always had the intention of finding a way to stay in the U.S. And she kind of tricked my dad into it, but it
Well, where
worked
did
out
where
very
did they meet?
positively.
So, sorry to interrupt you. Did they meet here?
No, they met in Caracas, Venezuela.
Gotcha.
They were both working for, I believe it was Gillette, Gillette's like Venezuelan headquarters, I think, at that time, if I'm not mistaken. And they got married, and like I said, I think my mom always had the intention of finding a way to stay in the U.S. My dad kind of went into it with the mentality of, I'll learn how to speak English fluently so I can further my career.
Sure.
And then, he tells the story that he just woke up one day. It was about, I think, 2.5 years in, and he was just like, I don't want to go back. I want to live in the States. He just loved it. And they were living in Lexington, Kentucky at the time.
No, it's awesome.
And so from there, my dad, who's a mechanical engineer by training, he found a company to sponsor his H-1B. And then, the rest is history. My brother and I were born in Lexington, Kentucky.
There you go. I went to school in Lexington, Kentucky, by the way.
Yeah. It's one of you mentioned it a couple of times. It's one of the other interesting coincidences. We both spent some time in China as well. So
Yeah, small
it's
world.
funny how those things intersect.
Definitely. So all that's to say, I was curious to see kind of how what's gone on there economically has shaped your family's political views and your political views personally.
Yeah. I think, in the first place, I think although I never experienced, any of Venezuela's collapse directly, I have a lot of family members who are very seriously affected by it, right? And
Yeah.
so I've always had this awareness of how things can go horrifically wrong, right, in a country, like how things can change very quickly. And so I've you could say I've had this kind of sense of like paranoia growing up, and that like I've always, wanted to be very active in public life, et cetera, because I think it's important for people to really take responsibility over their lives and over the political process, right? To prevent, certain things from happening. With regards to, Venezuela itself, I think I have a very unique perspective on it in the sense that a lot of the issues that, propelled Hugo Chavez into power had to do with very deep social and cultural and economic resentments that have been building up for decades, if not centuries, in Venezuela. And that's kind of what, it was the failure of the previous elite or the previous state to really address those concerns and move, people forward in a positive direction, generally speaking, that allowed, Chavez to come to power. But beyond that, I think the dangers of, authoritarian, socialist, policies that also are capable of really tanking, an economy, right? And how corruption can lead to the mismanagement of, important industries, and, everybody's quality of life just falls apart.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting takeaways from what you just said there is you have this paranoia almost in the sense that when things are going bad, you can't just sit on the sidelines and hope for them to improve. You have to get involved, or they will maybe deteriorate to a level that, the country becomes unrecognizable like that. So
Exactly. I have always been a firm believer that as soon as you see a problem, you have to solve it. Like you can't just leave it for another day, because all of those small problems start to add up, and then before you know it, you have something that nobody knows how to fix and is beyond, the skills of most people, right? And then, the more you wait to solve problems, the more difficult they become, right?
the
So
worse it gets. Leave something in the shadows, it becomes, a monster before you know it.
totally.
So before you got involved with the Forward Party, what was your tribe historically? We're talking politically or just in general. Where did you come from as far as what you considered to be your community?
Totally. I come from a split household in the sense that my mom has always been a little more on the conservative side, and my dad has always been a little more on the liberal side. Um, and so I've always had, a lot of moderate beliefs, I would say, on most things. At least growing up, I was originally an independent. Um, and then during the 2016, the lead up to the 2016 election, when, Trump won the nomination, I registered as a Democrat because I did not, I can see and understand the reasons why people would vote for Trump. The hollowing out of, American industry in the Midwest, a number of other, like, issues, including, these protracted wars in the Middle East. I can understand a lot of the reasons that Trump, was voted into power.
Yeah.
But I was afraid of what would happen, particularly because I didn't believe that it would be somebody who would, respect the rule of law, particularly, right? And so I was uh, anti-Trump from that perspective. But again, the Democratic Party wasn't really a natural fit for me in a lot of ways. I would say,
Mm.
on a number of social issues, I'm quite liberal, but I think the, kind of dipping into more socialist like policies has always been something that has made me deeply uncomfortable with the Democratic Party. And so,
Sure.
uh, in that sense, you could say that, I'm not on board with that particularly, right? And obviously, having started my own company, I have generally positive feelings about, capitalism. So
Little capitalist streak in you.
exactly. And that's not to say that, I don't believe in social safety nets or anything. When Andrew Yang ran for president, I was a huge proponent of, universal basic income. I
Yeah.
believe it's one solution of many that is going to have to be applied. So totally on board with all those things. I just, up until the Forward Party was launched, I never particularly felt, like I belonged to either of the parties.
So
Didn't feel strongly about them.
yeah. So you were always somewhat of a political nomad then.
Yeah, you could say that. Like I said, I was registered as an independent for most of my life. brief stint as a Democrat, and then I became an independent again after Biden won. And now I'm a forward member. So
And now you're a forward member.
exactly.
And now you're on the communications committee. And so what
Exactly.
you've been working on a lot of cool stuff, actually, that I'm pretty privy to in our conversations every week. So tell everybody listening to the podcast what you've been involved in as far as our website and some of the contributions you've made there.
Yeah. So I guess before I start with the comms committee, I can talk a bit about the OOC committee, the Organization and Oversight Committee, which was the first committee I joined. And my involvement there was helping put together part of the county chair manual. So, the OOC committee is working on some resources that, prospective county chairs or future county chairs can use to organize events in their counties, recruit, spread the word, basically instructions on anything you could ever want to do, right, or need to do in your county. And so I collaborated and finished my section of that. And then the OC committee had also requested that I put together an interactive map that could be put onto our website that would help people, contact their county chairs. And so, I've done a little bit of website work for the website. And then after that, you called me up and asked me to join the comms committee, and I figured it was probably a better fit for my personality and skill set. So I've switched over, and now, most of my responsibilities on the comms committee are centered around the website, so helping, get it organized, making sure things work well. And I work with Eric Gonzalez, great asset to the team, and Devin and Emily and Julie and you and, everybody else on the team.
Yeah, we've got a great group. That's been a lot of fun working with everybody. So you and I have gotten, sorry to interrupt there, but you and I have gotten to know each other pretty well through the comm committee, through just the time we've known each other, the various volunteering we've done with Forward and the like. And one of the things that always, it inspires me, it impresses me about you is just this optimistic view that you have.
Thank you.
Absolutely. About America, about technology, and you just have such a unique perspective with some of these things that we talk about and get into. But the thing again that strikes me most is just that optimism when there's so much pessimism going around, particularly with, AI is going to take everyone's jobs. The world's, going downhill. America's never going to be, what it used to be. Where does that come from? And what do you see as kind of the role technology and innovation is going to play in getting us to that, brighter place in America?
Yeah. So I think my optimism comes from a bunch of different places. So, I mean, I really believe that America is like the anchor of the world, right? Like I think it has a special destiny that, I view kind of like the future being born here, right? And you see it even in terms of technology. I mean, most technological innovation nowadays is happening either in the United States or China, right?
Yeah.
Europe doesn't really have many like large tech companies. There's even been some deindustrialization or some like offshoring of like, European industries with everything that's happening in Ukraine, energy prices, et cetera. And beyond that, I have this belief that if things don't work out in the US, then like, we're heading for some very dark times globally. I mean, I really do believe that, this is the last stand, right? There's nowhere else to go. Nowhere else to go.
If freedom dies here, where else is it going to come from? Right. There's no,
right.
Because America replacement waiting in the wings for us.
Not at all. And I think, my experience internationally, first of all, I'm optimistic because obviously having seen, the side of my family that was in Venezuela, like you just see how well things work in the United States, how great things are and how many opportunities there are.
Yeah.
And so you can't help but be when you have that, that comparison in your mind, you can't help but be particularly like proud and excited about, being American and living in the States. I also lived in Mexico for 3 years when I was in middle school, and that was at a time when a lot of the violence with the cartels was like really ratcheting up. This was around
Mm.
2008 when we moved there. Um, and while my family wasn't directly affected by any of these things, just this like ambient violence, right, that's happening
Yeah.
around the country, and uh, the general lack of security, basic infrastructure. I mean, something as simple as like not drinking, tap water, right? Or any number of other things because the infrastructure is not as developed as it would be in the States. Like basically all of that has played a really important role in how I perceive the US. And beyond that, I think, Americans being like very open-minded and very open to the future, generally speaking, and historically, I think is a really great cultural feature and something that I think is key towards, maintaining the quality of life and the positive influences that the US has around the world. And so
Yeah.
when
100%.
you see all of these changes in AI, all of these things that are happening, and really the center of the action is the U.S., like SpaceX, any number of other things. This is where the future is still being built. You and I both spent time in China as well, so
Yeah.
we're well aware that an alternative future, right, is being built in China. It's not one that I want to see take place in the US. And so, that's why I think it's so important to be involved and to try to build, new institutions to fix the issues that we have here.
Yeah. Absolutely. How do we get technology more integrated into, you know, our day-to-day operations as far as our government goes? I mean, we've got the average age of Congress is what, 65 years old, something like that. Um, I watched that hearing. This was several years ago now. They had all the big
Yeah.
tech executives on there, and there were just various congressmen grilling them with questions, and you could just tell they had no idea what they were talking about. That staffers just briefed them on this, what to ask, and it just seems like that's such a big problem, and that our government is so, at least in like the function that is public facing, is so behind the times with technology. I mean, how do we
Yeah.
get that stuff um, not only caught up, but leading the way again in terms of innovation and things like that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are a lot of different ways. For one part, I kind of think it's, people get the politicians that they deserve to a certain degree. And I think
Mhm.
that like, you know, in the US, we've been, maybe because of like all the prosperity that we've had, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, no real other country like threatening, the US. We've gotten a little lax about our politicians, the people who lead us, and I think most Americans don't really enjoy being political in the first place. Like most people kind
Yeah.
of view it as an evil that they would rather avoid.
They want to vote
Um,
once every 4 years, feel good
Once
that
every
they
four
did
years,
their
etc.
civic duty and go home and worry
And
about
like
their
I
life.
think if I'm not mistaken, local elections are like even worse, right?
Mhm.
And that's the issue, right? Because really local elections are the most important elections, right? The ones that directly
Definitely.
affect your community, right? Whereas like, the national election, of course it's important, but how much will it affect your day to day compared to local elections, right? And so we have these people in power who don't understand technology, and part of it is because I think, our generations, I know you're a little older than I am, but
Who's
our
counting,
generations I
Cesar?
think
Who's
have not,
counting?
but yeah, but you know, our generations have not really, I guess, had the fire in them to really go out and
Sure.
make themselves felt, and heard. And that's something that I'm hoping will change with the Forward Party. That people, young people will wake up and realize that, if we don't fight for some of these political positions that are going to, people who are in their 80s, maybe even 90s. I don't know what the average age in Congress is. Then we are not going to have people who are responsive to our interests, to our concerns. And so we really just have to to wake up, and it's difficult, right? But everything that's worth doing in life, and everything that's important in life, is going to be difficult, right? So
Definitely.
you just have to do it. There's no other option.
I get that from so many people who are involved in the forward party too. And this is frankly the way I feel about it is, this is what else, what other choice do we have? What else is going on that's, fighting back against this slowly declining establishment that's destroying our institutions and, every day getting worse and worse and worse. And one day we're going to wake up and it's not going to be America anymore. And I mean, the stakes are high, the problems are real. And it just seems like this system that we have is just not going to fix it the way that it needs to be fixed in so many different ways, to put it simply.
Yeah, and the unfortunate, thing that I've noted, I think about our generations as well, is that maybe we're not as rebellious, maybe, or we're not as interested in like really organizing at like a social level and going forth and doing things, right? Like I think one issue, I don't think that our generations act in a way that is like very agentic in comparison to maybe others, in the sense that, well, I think you get the sense when you talk to people who are, around our ages, that they feel like they don't have control over their lives.
Sure.
That there's nothing that they can do.
It's hopeless.
That the future is hopeless. That frankly, if like that's the attitude that you're going to have, then like of course nothing's going to get done, right? Like you have to exercise your agency, and so that's one thing that I'm hoping we'll see a shift in more and more, is that more people waking up to the fact that no, actually, the choices that you make are important, and they do have consequences, and the more we practice our agency, right, the more confident we become in our abilities to do things right, and to make things better. So
sure. Yeah, and at the very least, it feels better, right? If you're getting out and you're doing something, you're at least attempting to fix the problem. You can go to bed at night and put that energy, put that frustration of watching the news and watching all these things that you're frustrated with going on in the world and in our country. You can channel that frustration into some action and maybe make a difference, maybe get something done, even if it's just a small step. Then you build some momentum and somebody else can do something bigger, or you can do something bigger. You got to start somewhere.
And I think we should have a bit more of some fire in us, right? A little more pride in ourselves, and say like, what, even if this attempt doesn't work, we're going to keep trying, and we will keep trying until it works, right?
Definitely.
We'll only stop when our time is over, and that's, I think, the attitude that more of us have to adopt, right? It's like, hey, you know what, didn't work today, that's fine, we'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. You hear this with so many people within the forward party community, is, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I mean, this is not a project that's going to be, we're going to hit all of our goals in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, I know you and I have talked about this. This is a lifetime purpose, that we're pursuing in terms of, just trying to better this country.
I mean, I went into the forward party knowing that, or I won't say knowing, because life can always surprise you, but I went in thinking, hey, you know what, it's not unlikely that building this party will take 10 to 15 years, just to get to a point where it's like a very well-oiled machine and we're actually able to do the things that we want, right? But you got to start somewhere, and you have to start now, right? Because otherwise you're just delaying, the inevitable. So
yeah, I mean, it's like the old adage, you should have started yesterday, but the next best time to start is right now, in terms of, fixing these problems. And, I think the cool thing too is you talk about community and the community we're building within the forward party. Imagine 15 years from now, me and you were having a beer somewhere and talking about, all the things that have happened with this movement and whatever comes next, wherever this goes. I mean, how cool would that be? And will that be, in the bonds that are going to be built over that time?
Yeah, I think people, are not aware of how little it takes to really shift like public opinion or the sentiment, the general cultural sentiment, right? Like right now we've got a very well, I actually am not aware of how large the Forward Party is, but it's generally speaking like a small group or comparatively small group of like very dedicated people, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all you need, and it's like, hey, we'll push this thing forward. And as soon as the first victory comes, then like people turn their heads and they say, oh, what's going on over here, right? And then slowly it just snowballs. So
Definitely. I think there's so many people who are watching, the people who maybe are aware of the Forward Party who aren't involved. There's a lot of people, at least a significant number, who say to themselves, that sounds like a good idea, but it's unlikely that they're going to succeed. But I'll keep my eye on them. If they start, I've even had
exactly.
those conversations. I did some of the onboarding calls for the in Nation Builder for new volunteers. I was the person who was kind of just talking with new people and briefing them for a few months on kind of what they wanted to do and what the Forward Party was all about. I talked to several people who had that sentiment was, I'm going to keep my eye on you. I love what you guys are doing. And, if things start to pick up momentum, then we are going to get that
Exactly.
snowball effect.
You just have to keep pushing forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things, and the forward puns, just they keep coming, man. But one of the things that you've talked about that I think is just a really interesting idea, and perhaps something that you've mentioned you would pursue in the future through Forward or just in general, is kind of like an overhaul of our institutions at large. And I think on this theme of innovation, it would be really interesting to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So for a while, and obviously what's happening with kind of LLMs and AI in general, the
And
feasibility
LLMs
of something.
for the people at home, including myself, who don't know what that means.
Large language models, basically.
I see. Okay.
So that like ChatGPT, like that
Yes.
type of stuff, right? So basically, the premise was, I think that there are a lot of problems that are not being solved that are perhaps not particularly financially lucrative,
Mhm.
but are important problems. And if the government isn't taking care of them, then I think there are opportunities for you could call them like almost like public entrepreneurs in a sense, right?
Mhm.
To build organizations that tackle those issues, solve them, and then that experience, if you're able to network all of these people together, right, then suddenly you have a very strong bench for reforming or potentially creating, sorry, new institutions at the state and federal level, right?
So give
Uh,
me an example in terms of, let's say, one of these institutions and like a specific, problem.
oh man, so let me see if I can think of one off the top of my head. Um, this is an idea I've had for a while, but there's not a specific problem that I had in mind
Because these are pretty
right now. But
granular, right? There's different committees and um, I mean,
it might be
institutions and all sorts of
something
things.
as simple as like, I don't know, maybe a good example would be going to an area that has particularly bad like water infrastructure or something, right? And then like
Sure.
figuring out some way to solve that problem, right? Um, and actually, I think if people are able to find, innovative, effective ways to provide like basic needs or to provide, a lot of services in areas that are perhaps being neglected, that's one really strong way to get real hands-on experience about how to solve certain issues. Um,
So
so
I've got one for you here.
yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
we were talking the other day. Me and my girlfriend were talking about this. Um, Child protective services. So if there's a child who's getting abused in, Texas in particular, um, child protective services is supposed to come in and, take deal with the issue. Right.
Mhm.
And from everything that I've read and heard about that, it's not very effective. And it's something that, I was talking to her about. I was like, and this is a problem that, there's kids who are just getting abused, and adults can see that
Yeah.
the kid is, in a broken home, and they can't do anything about it. And the kid continues, they know it's happening. They should do something. They should intervene, but there's just not a service that's effectively solving this problem. And then if they do, we have the adoption infrastructure is rife with all sorts of issues where
Yeah. Yeah.
these foster homes are, just as abusive in some cases as the original homes. And
Totally.
that seems to me like something that, a startup mentality of sorts would be able to solve. There should be a way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there's that disconnect between obviously public sector and that kind of innovation of the private sector.
Yeah. I think like, I honestly, that's a really interesting issue. I hadn't even thought about it, but you're right that like there's a lot of really good and important work that can be done in a lot of forgotten institutions, in the sense that it's
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe it's something that most people are not aware of. And because most people are not aware of, maybe the work isn't particularly visible, then the quality of like that institution has declined over time.
Right.
Maybe it's, lost its budget to other like priorities, et cetera.
Sure.
And so if you and a group of friends have the resources, whether it's financial or other, to go in and fix that problem, not only have you won the affection and the loyalty of all the people whose problem you solved, right? Which then makes, political change even easier, right? Because now you've got people who believe in you and who support you and who are willing to go the extra mile to vote for you to help, push whatever, political platforms you might have in the future.
Yeah.
It builds a lot of very important skills that are conducive to solving problems at a much larger scale, right? So maybe that's one of the things that I see at the national level that frustrates me at times, is that, and it's this, people have this notion that if like, hey, we just change the guy at the very top, like everything else will kind of,
Yeah.
fix
As if
itself, right?
that's the person who's causing all these problems. It's so much more just, no one can even really fathom, if you're not there, how the complexity and the levels and layers of bureaucracy that, all these
Exactly.
things.
And like
need
that's not to say that the person at the top isn't important, because obviously they are, right? Um, but if a lot of these problems are handled at a very local level, then they don't make their way up to the top. And so obviously it becomes easier and easier for the people at the top to focus on issues that only they can focus on, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, basically, if people, spot local institutions, they don't even necessarily have to be, government departments, but just any type of like, public or private institution that maybe used to be a cornerstone of a community, right? And has fallen into disrepair. If you get a group of people together who care and are interested in, improving that, taking ownership over it, then do it, like do it, and you'll find that you grow tremendously.
Absolutely. And you, we talked about this before the podcast. So you are a newly minted entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
Yeah, totally. So recently, it's been in the works for some time now, but we just had our announcement yesterday. So we launched the Oniric Foundry, which is an entertainment company that is dedicated to crafting the best new science fiction and science fantasy stories across various mediums. And so our first project is a video game, and we're working very hard on that right now. But I believe, something that people who are interested in science fiction and in general, it's, I think, pretty apparent, is that typically when you see new science fiction stories, they always have a dystopian bent, right?
Definitely.
And this goes back. I mean, when was Soylent Green? That was probably like in the 70s, right? But you've got Soylent Green, Akira, Blade Runner, Minority Report, Gattaca. You'd probably consider Hunger Games, et cetera. Also being Jurassic Park, for example. Like there's always an example of things going horribly wrong, right?
Countless.
Whereas, exactly, countless. Whereas, before, I think that there was definitely a much more optimistic bent to science fiction, right? And so the company, our focus is not creating specifically optimistic like science fiction. Like really, our focus is on creating, very moving, grand stories that leave strong impressions on people, right? Creating good art.
Yeah.
That's really our focus. But me being naturally optimistic, that lends itself towards the kind of lens that I would like to use, right? And so uh, that's basically the focus of the company. So, like I said, the idea is to start with this video game, and in the future, as the company grows, I'd love to expand into whether it's graphic novels, TV shows, movies potentially. Although this may be far down the line, but you
Got to
got to start
dream
somewhere,
big.
right? Exactly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great thread to tie it all together, right? Got to start somewhere and you got to dream big.
Exactly. It's I think people would be surprised to see how much they can do in a fairly short period of time if they really apply themselves, right? Or if they really focus. And so, hey, this is a long-term project for me. I'm throwing myself into it completely, and we'll see where it goes.
Very exciting, Cesar. Well, I'll be keeping a close eye on it, and appreciate you coming on the podcast this evening.
Totally. Thank you for having me, Brian.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for listening at home. And as always, please let us know what you thought about tonight's episode and any guest topics or otherwise that you'd like to see us talk about on the podcast. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks again, Cesar, and we'll see you next week. All right.